Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Monster Slayer Ranger subclass. And this is another one of these subclasses where I like the concept but not necessarily the implementation, unfortunately. But I do think it's a cool idea for a subclass. So let's at least take a look at the description and see what they're trying to do. So Monster Slayer, you have dedicated yourself to hunting down creatures of the night and wielders of grim magic. A Monster Slayer seeks out vampires, dragons, evil fae, fiends, and other magical threats. Trained in supernatural techniques to overcome such monsters, Slayers are experts at unearthing and defeating mighty mystical foes. That sounds cool. It reminds me of like Van Helsing or The Witcher, or some of these other ideas of this like guy traveling the countryside fighting monsters, maybe for hire. I think at a party of monster hunters who your campaign is literally just going around from town to town solving people's problems, like Supernatural or The Littlest Hobo or something. That could be kind of a cool campaign, But I don't really see that there's anything that monster slayers get which makes them better at slaying monsters than basically any other class in the game. So oh well, let's take a look at the abilities. So at level 3, you are going to start getting access to your Monster Slayer magic. They do have their own spell list. I don't think it's a great spell list overall, but there are subclasses that have no spells, right? So I'll take a poor spell list over no spell list. So let's call this one a small win for the Monster Slayer. Level 3, you get protection from evil and good. This is a good spell, but very circumstantial. So if those circumstances arise, then nice, but otherwise, That said, though, having a spell like that as being treated as being always prepared is probably the best way to have it, because I probably wouldn't have been preparing it otherwise. So, at least you've got it there. Level 5, you get Zone of Truth. This is also a pretty circumstantial spell. But if you do need to interrogate somebody, Zone of Truth is really good for that. So there is that. The problem is, though, that unless you were going with, like, say maybe Druidic Warrior and you went Wisdom as your main stat and you're using Shillelagh, most Rangers are going to have Dex as their main stat. I mean, maybe Strength, but we're going to have, like, one of your, main combat stats, and Wisdom is going to be, like, your number 2 stat, or maybe even number 3, But most Rangers just don't have a high Wisdom score, which means that your spell save DC just isn't going to compete with, like, say, where a cleric or a druid would have been, right? So Zone of Truth, while still being nice under specific circumstances, is even less reliable for you than it would have been for, say, a cleric. Level 9, Magic Circle. I guess there's defensive uses for this, but most people use it if they're trying to bind something. And although druids have access to some great summoning spells, they're not summoning the type of things you usually bind in a magic circle. That tends to be like, fiends, maybe celestials even. It tends to be extraplanar creatures, not, raccoons. So, can't say I'm a big fan of that on the spell list at all. Level 13, you get Banishment. Banishment is a pretty decent spell. I mean, it is all or nothing, which can kind of suck. But at least, if you're a full caster and you're getting it at level 7, that's early enough that it can be pretty handy. You can even upcast and get more than one target. Also handy. The problem is, though, that once again, you're probably not going to have a great charisma, which means that it's going to be easier for things to resist. And by virtue of the fact that you're already 13th level when you get it, you're now starting to deal with things with like legendary resist or magic resistance, where they're getting advantage on their saving throws. Those type of abilities become a lot more common as you start getting to those type of levels. So again, it's not that it's a bad spell, it's just not a great spell for this character, in my opinion. And at level 17, we get Hold Monster. And everything we just said about Banishment applies to Hold Monster too. Again, it's one of these all or nothing saving throws, and your spell save DC probably wasn't your main concern on the Ranger. Again, that's not to say it's completely worthless, right? Maybe it'll land, maybe you get lucky. You can strategically avoid things that are going to have legendary resist, Or maybe you just throw it out there and hope for the best, and then maybe the wizard can land something instead. I personally don't like trying to burn through things, magic resistances or legendary resistances. I find it just, I would have been better off using a spell that gave no saving throw in the first place, usually. But, sometimes you do what you gotta do, right? Anyways, moving away from the spell list, like I said, there's a lot of circumstantial spells. There are some good ones, but they're the higher level ones, and they both allow saving throws, and they're all or nothing. So, overall, I don't think it's a great spell list for the Ranger. But like I said, there are Rangers with no spell list at all, so, still better there. You also get Hunter's Sense at 3rd level. So you gain the ability to peer at a creature and magically discern how best to hurt it. As an action, choose one creature you can see within 60 feet of you. You immediately learn whether the creature has any damage immunities, resistances, or vulnerabilities, and what they are. If the creature is hidden from divination magic, you sense that it has no damage immunities, resistances, or vulnerabilities. You can use this ability a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier, minimum once, and you regain all abilities when you finish a long rest. This ability would not be so bad if it didn't require an action. The fact that it takes your action really just cripples the usefulness of it in combat. Like, even if it was a bonus action, I don't think that'd be so bad. And honestly, I don't know why it couldn't have been a free action. Maybe make it a free action, and then, like, say the Ranger has to make, like, a survival roll or something, and then if you give a DC or something, and if they pass, then they gain all that information about the creature. But don't make it a check, which would require an action. Just give them a roll, like maybe when initiative starts or something like that, right? When you roll initiative, they can try to identify if the creature has any of these vulnerabilities or weaknesses, number of times a day equal to your wisdom modifier. The fact that it takes your action is what really cripples this ability. Because the truth is that, like, learning, like, damage immunities and resistances and vulnerabilities is actually a pretty good ability. The problem is that the cost is just so high, and is, I was going to say it's also limited to number of times using a wisdom bonus, but honestly, if it's taking your action, you're probably not maxing out your number of uses per day anyways, right? There are some scenarios, though, where this can be good. Like, for example, maybe you're scouting and you have an opportunity to observe the creature that you're going to be fighting before combat begins. Or maybe you have an opportunity to, like, role play with it and your party's interacting with it, and you can sense its, like, vulnerabilities or whatever before the combat begins. So there are circumstances where this ability can still be really good. It's just the vast majority of the time you're going to want to use this, it's just not going to be very, very useful. It's requiring your action, and that's a lot to give up just to find out, like, oh, the thing that breathes fire is immune to fire. Like, your party probably figured that out already, There might be a circumstance where maybe you're like 2 rounds into the combat and nothing your party's doing is hurting this thing. And then you're like, you know what? Maybe it is worth to use my action to figure out what's going on here. But again, that's a very rare circumstance. So moving on. Also at level 3, you get Slayer's Prey. Starting at 3rd level, you can focus your ire on one foe, increasing the harm you inflict upon it. As a bonus action, you designate one creature you can see within 60 feet of you as the target of this feature. The first time each turn that you hit that target with a weapon attack, it takes an extra 1d6 damage from the weapon. This benefit lasts until you finish a short or long rest. It ends early if you designate a different creature. So, I like that it comes back on a short rest. That's kind of nice. But once again, it's requiring a bonus action. Last video we just covered a Ranger subclass that gets a similar ability that takes no action or bonus action. It's just you hit, you do damage. That's just much stronger, This is competing things like Hunter's Mark. It's competing with, say, maybe like Crossbow Expert or, maybe Polearm Mastery or whatever else, right? 2-weapon fighting. Rangers have 2-weapon fighting style. You might have decided to go that direction, And now any of those things that could have been using your bonus action, you're competing with this, and, granted, in a longer fight, you could set this up and use Hunter's Mark because this does not require concentration. So, there is potential to, like, stack the damage up. But now you're really needing a fight that's going to go multiple rounds where that can start to build up. And, you know, again, it's not that it's a worthless ability, it's just not great either. And that's kind of what the theme of the Monster Slayer is. You get a bunch of abilities where every one of them you look at it and you're like, well, I mean, it's not terrible. And then you look at the next one and you're like, it's not terrible. And then the next one you're like, it's not terrible. Maybe I'd use it. And at the end you're like, there's nothing good though. So why am I going to be drawn to this other than for the flavor and theme of the class itself? But anyways, moving on. Level 7, Supernatural Defense. At 7th level, you gain extra resilience against your prey's assaults on your mind and body. Whenever the target of your Slayer's prey forces you to make a saving throw, and whenever you make an ability check to escape that target's grapple, add a 1d6 to your roll. I mean, again, you have to have your Slayer's prey on the creature already. So if you were using Hunter's Mark, for example, you don't have Slayer's prey on it, probably, unless you then set it up on a subsequent round, right? So you have to have your Slayer's prey on it. Then, I mean, escaping a grapple as while the thing's Slayer's preyed, we're getting pretty circumstantial there already. That's not so great. But, you know, adding a 1d6 to a saving throw is actually a really solid ability. Nothing is necessarily wrong with that. But again, it's an ability that's requiring some setup time. There's an opportunity cost because you had to use your bonus action, maybe this round or a previous round, to use your Slayer's prey on it. You know, I'm not complaining about adding an extra, 3.5 on average to a saving throw. That's actually really solid. It's just the fact that, if I really needed this ability, I better have it set up in advance. And that's just not necessarily a reliable situation. Anyways, at level 11, we get Magic User's Nemesis. At 11th level, you gain the ability to thwart someone else's magic. When you see a creature casting a spell or teleporting within 60 feet of you, you can use your reaction to try to magically foil it. The creature must succeed on a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC, or its spell or teleport fails and is wasted. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So this is another one where this ability actually isn't bad. You're not technically counterspelling it, which is kind of nice because counterspell itself can be counterspelled, right? So you don't really have to worry about that. There's a lot of creatures that have teleport type abilities as a movement, which isn't technically a spell. Your party's wizard or sorcerer or warlock or whoever can't counterspell that either because it's not actually a spell, but you can. Again, though, you have the same problem we've already mentioned, which is that it's requiring a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. If Wisdom's your main stat, that's actually fairly reasonable. But if it's not, trouble abounds. I still think it's not a bad ability to just be able to throw out. Maybe you get lucky, like I said. I think this is actually one of their better abilities the Monster Slayer gets. But you're not getting it till 11th level, which is kind of a bummer. Anyways, we finally have at level 15, Slayer's Counter. So you gain the ability to counterattack when your prey tries to sabotage you. If the target of your Slayer's prey forces you to make a saving throw, you can use your reaction to make one weapon attack against the query. You make this attack immediately before making the saving throw. If your attack hits, your save automatically succeeds in addition to the attack's normal effects. So again, the fact that you could use this to automatically make a saving throw is actually pretty solid, right? But again, you have to have it set up in advance. You use Slayer's Prey on it. It has to be forcing you to make a saving throw for some reason. That's not unheard of, right? So that could be okay. You also have to have the range to hit it, though. So, if you're playing like a melee-focused build and something tries to hit you with a spell from 30 or 40 feet away, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. Again, it's not that the ability itself is really that bad. Making an automatic saving throw is fine. Using your reaction to make an attack back against the creature is really solid. The problem is that once again, there's a lot of setup, and is very circumstantial about whether or not you're going to be able to use it, right? This isn't like something attacks you and you get to attack it back. It has to be casting or using some sort of spell on you, or some ability that's requiring you to make a saving throw of some sort. And if you're in range, you can then attack back and make your saving throw. Which, like I said, it's not that it's terrible. It's just, I don't know that it's spectacular either. And we're getting it at 15th level. There's worse abilities gained at higher levels than this, honestly. So I'm not going to say it's like the worst. But I think this really speaks to the whole problem with the Monster Slayer when we really stop to look at it. Their best abilities are the highest level abilities they have, which, your campaign may never get that high. And even if it does, you're obviously reaching that ability way later in the course of your adventure than you would have normally. The low level abilities are not super inspiring. And even the ones that I think are not bad or decent, they all require setup. And, this is something where if you wanted to like really have good use of your bonus action, maybe be attacking with a lot or have other things you want to do with it, that just isn't really a good fit for the Monster Slayer. You pretty much are forced to be using your Slayer's Prey on like big targets. And because it only comes back on a short or long rest, it means that if you have multiple encounters before you're able to take a short rest, once that ability's gone, then you don't have anything until you rest again. And, if you're like in a campaign where you have like encounter, short rest, no big deal, right? But, if you're like having to fight through like even a small dungeon, maybe you have to go through like 5 or 6 or 8 encounters in a row. And now you have to like keep trying to save that ability for the big boss fight maybe. What happens if you fight a bunch of creatures that cast spells, or, Umber Hulks with like confusion abilities or whatever else? There's a lot of other things you might have wanted to use that saving throw on, and now Slayer's Prey on, sorry. And now you're either like forced to use it on these other creatures or save it for the boss. And, I really prefer something where, say, I'm just able to consistently use my abilities all the time, right? Like maybe even if it's something simple like a Hunter's Mark, like maybe I'm just using a longbow, and so I don't really have much with my bonus action, but I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to cast Hunter's Mark and stuff, and that's what I'm going to do with my bonus action a bunch, right? I mean, that can work with Slayer's Prey instead, but like I said, now you're limited to that one encounter per short rest where you're able to use it. Hopefully you roll well in your initiative so you can actually get it on the target before it has a chance to start hitting you with AoE abilities or spell abilities or causing fear or anything else, It's just a class where, like, there's some cool ideas and you can clearly see what they were trying to do, but it just feels too disjointed in my opinion. Anyways, like I said, I try not to be too negative on some of these classes. I do understand that, there's people out there who probably really like the Monster Slayer, right? And I personally really like the concept of it. I think it's a neat idea. I just wish that, like, some of these abilities were, like free actions or whatever, right? Especially when you look at like a subclass like the Gloomstalker, right? The Gloomstalker, I'm getting my wisdom bonus to my initiative. I'm getting an extra attack in the opening round of combat. I don't have to set anything up. It's just automatic. That opening round of combat, I get an extra attack. And that extra attack does an extra D8 of damage on top of that, right? It's not like, oh, I had to put my Monster Slayer on that, which used my bonus action, and now now I can get to do an extra D6 of damage. The Gloomstalker's like, no, I get an extra attack. I'm going to attack that guy with my extra attack and do extra damage on top of it. Oh, and he might not even be able to see me because I'm invisible if he requires dark sight to see me, So, at the end of the day, it's really, really hard to like justify recommending something like this over some of the other subclasses that it's competing with. Anyways, those are my thoughts on it. I wish we had better news. The next few videos are going to be a little more positive because we're going to I wanted to kind of tackle with this one now because I feel like it's one of the poorest Ranger subclasses, honestly. And, we'll build up to a more positive note before we leave Ranger, right? So you have that to look forward to. If you're a Ranger guy and you're just like, oh man, this guy's always like dunking on Rangers and just seems like he hates Rangers. There's a lot of good Rangers out there. Just, this one's just kind of disappointing. That said, if you well optimize it, it'll be fine to play anyways. But, you're going to put that effort into optimizing something else and probably had a better character. Anyways, that's everything. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I love reading everybody's comments, and I read every single one, even if I don't always respond. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.